The laws are different if you have a family living together
Welcome
versus
to
you
the
have
Freedom Point
unrelated.
Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right, welcome back, Freedom Point Podcast listeners. Thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point. I've really got a truly amazing guest. Now, I know I say that on every episode, but this one, I'm going to drive it home. I've got Pascal Wagner here with me today. Pascal, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, JD.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, listeners, the reason why I say that is Pascal and I are literally cut from an almost identical cloth. Okay. We must be two brothers with a different mother. I'm not sure, but him and I are like the same, right? So we'll see how this conversation goes. It should be pretty fun. But just to give my listening audience a little bit of background on Pascal, he generates over $100,000 in annual passive income from 20 LP investments that he's a limited partner investor in, a passive investor just like myself and many listening to the show today. He also generates another 100K from a 100 unit co-living portfolio that he's involved with in Atlanta. He provides limited partner investors a direct path to financial freedom and the chance to invest alongside him. See, listeners, I told you he's cut just like me. All right, Pascal, that said, let's dive into it. Let's chop it up. Why don't you help our listening audience learn a little bit more about you, your journey, what you're focused on today, etc.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for the amazing intro. I think relevant to the story is when I first, first became an adult. At 23, I started investing in real estate. I was constantly on this journey of how do I find quote unquote passive income, right? And I think when you're younger and you don't have a lot of money, um, you know, all you're focused on is how do I move away from getting paid for my time to having to getting like mailbox money. And so I started with real estate, investing in single family homes, and my best friend and we would rent them by the room. And so therefore we'd start generating more cash than you would renting to a single family. And I've been doing that for a little over a decade now. And so that's how I started. That's how I got, the ins and outs and the experience of what it's like to buy and own real estate. I've transacted over, I think, 17 different properties at this point. I own 12 in Atlanta. And so I have that background. And at some point, I started working for I ran a venture-backed startup, and after I sold that, I started working for the venture capital firm, one of them that invested in us. And I had the amazing opportunity to basically be a fund manager there. And so I was responsible for deploying $150 million over 3 years into early stage venture companies. And so I learned quite a bit about how institutions put together an investment thesis, and they raise capital, and they follow a very systematic structure to investing, which really kind of set the foundation for this next part of my career. And while I was working at Techstars in 2021, my father passed away from old age, and he left my mom a large inheritance. And so all of a sudden, I became the financial manager of the family and had to make sure that my mom could continue staying retired and live out the rest of her life. And so uh, at that point, real estate, this co-living portfolio that I've mentioned to you, at that point was over 100% of my income. And I realized at that point that you know, if this is the money that my mom is going to live off of, it needs to be a lot more diversified. And that's kind of when I had the oh shit moment. Is like, I can't just keep plowing money into this active real estate model that I know how to do. I mean, there's a point where you need to start diversifying, and so uh, that's when I got into LP investing. So I knew the real estate game. I knew that was a consistent way to get cash flow and tax benefits and equity growth and all the benefits that come with investing in real estate. But now I can invest with other operators that are top of their class and invested in all different kinds of things, whether that's oil and gas, self storage, apartment buildings, retail, development, you name it, right? Like the idea was to then get a passive portfolio. And I realized that when I got into this niche, there are very few resources outside of podcasts that really teach you how to be an LP investor. There's 20 plus asset classes that you can invest into, from senior assisted living to, self storage or apartment buildings, like I mentioned. And no one sits down and tells you, here's why you might be interested in this asset class over the other. Like, oil and gas, can maybe help you write off some of your W 2 income if you structure it the right way. If you need immediate income, private credit might be a good route versus a development where if you don't need cash flow up front, that that might be a good play for you. So I've been now set out to help people really understand and learn all the things that I had to figure out over the last several years and provide people a way to invest alongside me in the deals that I'm doing.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I appreciate you kind of sharing with our listening audience that background. And before we jumped into the recorded session for my listening audience, I challenged Pascal on writing a book on the topic of different asset classes and what are the pros, the cons, the benefits and lack thereof, of each of those asset classes. So really appreciate that. Also appreciate, knowing that you've got a venture capital background. I did not have a background in raising capital for VC, but I am an investor in several different, early growth startup companies, of which, either A, I'm going to have those investments go to the moon, or B, I'm going to consider those to be a complete donation, if that makes sense, right? So
Absolutely.
yet to be determined there in terms of where those investments go. But, love also kind of hearing about that transition from, venture capital into the passive income, space. I would be remiss not to ask you a question that, you've brought up a couple of different times related to co-living and that portfolio, right? Can you kind of explain to the listening audience a little bit more about, what is co-living? And why is it that you decided to kind of maybe get into that, niche of real estate investing?
Absolutely. So back in 2020, back in 2013 is when I invested in my first home. And, how did I get into it? It was really, I provided a loan to my best friend, Diego Corzo, uh, and he bought his home and then rented out the extra bedrooms. And so he was now living for free, making an extra $200 a month in net income on top of, covering the mortgage and expenses for the home. And, we talked every single week. And so at that point, it was like, hey, do you want to do this, the next deal together? And so that's how I got into it. It was really a way, back then, as an investor, you're always trying to figure out, how do I get the most out of the investment or the asset? And uh, I always focused on cash flow. And so, how do I maximize the cash flow in a deal? Well, we learned that if you take back then it was like a $200,000 home and you rent it to a single family, you might make $1,200 a month. But I take that same home that has 4 bedrooms and I rent it out by the room for $600 a bedroom. And now all of a sudden I'm making $2,400 instead of $1,200 in gross income. And so if your mortgage is mortgage plus expenses is $1,000, $200 in net income, the 1,200 minus the 1,200 versus $2,400 a month minus that 1,000, which is $1,400 a month. All of a sudden, you have like a 6 or 7x cash flow on your cash flow. So it was a model that I personally had lived in and I understood and I am very passionate about, right? When I went to college, I had multiple roommates in the house that I lived in, right? When I got out of college, I moved to Boulder, Colorado, and I lived in an entrepreneur house where I had 4 other roommates. And so I know exactly what it's like. I know what the pain points are. It's something that I personally had to deal with and I lived in for over 8 years. And so the model just made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, what I'm hearing, Pascal, is you decided early on to get creative and to really challenge the traditional mindset, right, of investing in Wall Street products, maxing your W-2 each year. You really early on, you scratched that entrepreneurial itch and you found a way to cash flow in a very creative way. My question for you is, at least as it relates to the co-living, space, are there any types of maybe city or county zoning restrictions at all in place when you're acquiring a single family home with 4, bedrooms and really largely converting that single family home into a small multi?
Yeah, there's a lot of gray area in this space. I think about this a lot in comparison to Airbnb. Right when Airbnb first started, there were no laws or regulations around if you could Airbnb your place. And uh, it's very similar with co-living. I think largely a lot of the rules are trying to prevent brothels and these types of uh, pain points in a given city. I'll tell you, I'm in multiple lawsuits. And I've been doing this long enough. I've been in a few where they've been, I lost at county court because no neighbor wants to have one of these homes next to their home. But when, we go through the appeals and we move to city and we move to state, the deals often get thrown out. And I will tell you that uh, there are constitutional rights that are at play here. So, like an example would be, in my eyes, the laws are different if you have a family living together versus you have unrelated people living together. And that is a knock against the Fair Housing Act, which states that regardless of your color, socioeconomic status, gender, or familial status, you should have the same rights as everyone else. And a lot of the rules are, like all of these counties where they say, it's not quite, hey, you're in violation of our county rules, and it's like, okay, well, the county, you're breaking a federal law, the Fair Housing Act. Like you're saying that I'm not allowed to have multiple unrelated people living here, but you're allowing people that live as a family to have 8, 10. There's no limit in many of these counties, and I've dealt with this problem. I bought my first couple homes in Austin, Texas, and then I bought some in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I've kind of consolidated everything into Atlanta, Georgia. And so I've dealt with a bunch of different jurisdictions and things like that. But there is a lot of gray area in this space. And I think if you're trying to eke out returns for anything, you will have some sort of risk, and the legal risk is one that's associated with this type of asset class.
Well, Pascal, before I asked you that question, I was thinking about getting into the co-living portfolio space, but you've since talked me out of it. So I appreciate that.
I'm Zach Haptonstall, CEO and co-founder of Rise 48 Equity. Our goal is to help you protect and grow your wealth by investing in large multifamily apartment buildings. We do all the work as far as sourcing these large apartment buildings from the brokers, doing all of the on-site management with our vertically integrated property management company, doing all the renovations with our vertically integrated construction company. We completely rebrand the exteriors. We will renovate the interiors to our full platinum level scope, which increases the value of the asset to get that profit margin for the investors. If you'd like to learn about how you can partner with us on these exciting opportunities, and go to our website and set up a call with our team.
With that said, I think now would be a great time for us to shift the conversation from your active real estate portfolio and let's talk about the passive side, right? Which is why most people listen to this podcast in the first place. Now, you've generated over $100,000 in annual passive income. I've lapsed you one time in that regard. Okay. So we'll have to compare our portfolio notes after the podcast here. But, what strategies, or principles have been essential to achieving such consistent returns as a limited partner passive investor?
So I went to this as part of my journey of trying to learn more about how limited partner investing works. Is I attended there were no masterminds that I could find related to specifically LP investing. And so, but there were many conferences related to learn how to become a syndicator or a GP or raise money for your real estate projects. And so one notably was the real estate radio guys. There was one slide that made a big impression on me, which was there are only three things that you can optimize for in an investment. Some investments have only one, and some investments have two, some investments have all three. And that is you can either optimize for equity growth, cash flow, or tax benefits. Things like crypto or, if you're investing in the stock market, those are primarily equity growth driven investments. You're investing in them because you want the money you have in there to double, triple as fast as possible. There are investments like real estate that provide a little bit of all three. So, your equity will grow as the appreciation in the home, you get cash flow from the rents, and there are major tax incentives that reduce your tax liability when you invest in real estate. And so many of the LP investors I come across often don't think about it in that way, and it's not fault to them. I've been in the same boat, right? When you first start getting into investing, it's like you don't have much deal flow. You might get a deal in your email and you're like kind of looking at it and you're like, oh, is this something I want to invest into or not? And you're focused on the deal, and not as much about like, what is that I actually want out of my investment? And so, I have a portion of my portfolio that is in really high risk, high equity growth things like in crypto and the stock market. And that's my only expectation. I'm not expecting cash flow. I'm not, and then when I'm making an LP investment, my primary objective is cash flow because I'm trying to provide retirement for my mom and myself, right? So I'm going in and I'm saying, look, I'm only going to look at a deal if it has at least an 8% cash on cash return. A lot of people ask me, how do you vet a deal? I mean, the first step is, does this even align with where I'm trying to go? So I think that would be my first take on that.
Yeah, it makes total sense, Pascal. And obviously that's very true what you're saying, and that oftentimes investors make, very emotional decisions, right? They make an emotional decision because, they're attracted to in some way, shape, or form to the messenger that's bringing them the opportunity, right? Or
how do you think about that?
I think about it the same way. I mean, it's all about what your goals are, and our goals do change over time, right? So somebody in their 20s, right, maybe more focused on, equity growth and some tax benefits. But, as you age and get into your 40s and 50s, you start thinking about, how can I replace the dependence on the W-2? And how you do that is obviously through cash flow. And then you have some investors, myself included, where I actually like to invest in multiple different, types of properties and assets and investments, some of which are more, heavy, equity growth, whereas others are more heavy on the cash flow side. So I appreciate you highlighting that. I think it's incredibly important that people don't fall in love with the messenger. They don't fall in love with the pitch deck or the highest IRR, but rather they really, take time to really identify what are your goals, right? And if you don't know what your goals are, right, reach out to somebody who can coach you through that process, right? And at the end of that process of identifying, where you're at this stage of your life, then let's take a look at some investment opportunities out there that meet and are aligned with what your goals and objectives are.
No doubt. Love it. Yeah. I mean, I even had my own coach who literally coached me through that process. We were like, all right, if you invest in these things today, 10 years from now, where do you expect those investments to be?
Yeah.
Do you like how that looks? Yes or no? If not, how would you readjust your portfolio? So double down on that. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So my question for you now is like, what about that newbie investor? What about that guy that, you're in 20 plus deals as an LP investor. I'm in 30 plus deals as an LP investor. We've been, through multiple different, highs and lows in the real estate space, different asset classes, different market locations, different sponsors. What about that brand new guy, out there that's never invested in a real estate syndication? He's going to scrape together $50,000 in cash, or he's going to, unlock some funds in his, IRA through a self-directed IRA strategy. What are the three, maybe 2 or 3 different critical steps, right, to get started with confidence as a new limited partner investor?
I have one. This will not work for everyone, but I'm going to offer this piece. It's not financial advice because I'm not allowed to give you individual financial advice, but something to consider that I wish someone told me. And when I think about any time that you are going to do something new, your goal is to reduce the risk as much as possible, right? Like the Warren Buffett, like rule number 1, don't lose money. Rule number 2, refer to rule number 1. Most people start with the hardest approach to investing. I think there are three different stages to investing. There's the beginner, intermediate, and hard mode. And most people start on hard mode, which is investing in equity-based, like I'm going to invest my money. I'm not allowed to touch it for 5 or 10 years. And, like I've never evaluated a company before. And, all of a sudden I'm going to, wire $50K into this deal. And look, I understand why many people do that. It's because, hey, maybe they have a huge tax liability and they learned about alternative investments. And so they're like, oh, this deal has a major tax incentive, so that's going to be my first deal. I get that. On the split side, I would consider an intermediate style investment one where you are able to, you invest your money and then, you're starting to get cash flow roll in within the first year. And, you may not get your principal back or something like that, but you're getting your return over time. And then I think the beginner version, which is what I wish I started with, was investing in basically like debt or private credit. And the reason I say that, and the reason why I wish I started there, is because many of these debt or private credit funds are ones where, like, I'll take the flagship one that I talk about all the time, and I, wish everyone would kind of start with, is the DLP lending fund by DLP Capital. And it's a fund where you can invest, I mean, in this case, it's 200K, but let's take that minimum aside. You're investing and you get your first distribution in 45 days. and you get monthly distributions after that. You can pull your money out pretty much any time. And, you can say like, oh, you know what, this isn't working how I expected it to. I'd like to pull my money out. You get to learn and see what does, a lot of times you're making this investment and maybe you're investing in a value add deal, and for 2 years, you don't get any distribution. And maybe the operators don't send a quarterly update. And so you really don't have any idea of, is it performing? How is it doing? Is this real? Did the person run away with my money? Whereas you invest in something that maybe provides monthly distributions or something like that, you very quickly know, how does this work? How do they communicate? And there are so many nuances to investing in something new, like alternative investments. You don't even know what to look out for. And to me, when you're investing in something, you want to reduce that risk as much as possible when you're getting into something new. So that's maybe a framework that I'd offer out to think about it. How do you relate to that?
I appreciate that. You're like the host of the show now. So thanks for asking me the question. But no, in all seriousness, I fully agree with you 100%. My very first LP investment that I made back in 2015 was definitely a heavy growth equity play with little to no cash flow, especially during the first 2 years of that investment. The reason why I didn't make a second investment until 4 years later is because I wanted the investment thesis to prove itself out. And what you're suggesting here is find investments that produce immediate cash flow day one so that you can start to see the investing thesis prove itself out right away. In addition to being aligned with operators that provide transparent and consistent, monthly, I would argue, communications on how things are going, at the asset level with respect to whatever asset class that might happen to look like for you. So, Pascal, I really appreciate as well, your kind of thoughtful, input and observations on, limited partner investors, getting into these types of opportunities with the focus, of reducing risk, focusing on cash flow, maximizing tax benefits. All of those same reasons are reasons why I, personally got involved in real estate investing as a limited partner investor, and why obviously now I'm in a position to help educate, others in that space as well. So I would like to, as we kind of close up here, I'd love to give you the opportunity to maybe tell our listening audience a little bit more about how, we can learn more about what you're up to, connect with you, et cetera.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. I think what I would offer up here is I would say, if you're interested in alternative investments and, you don't have a lot of deal flow and you're not sure, I'm a big proponent of, if you see a lot of deals, you can be more choosy. And so, when I first started, one of the biggest problems was, where do I get all these deals and where do they come from? And so I've put together a resource called my Passive Investing Starter Kit. Every Friday, I send you the top 5 deals that I come across, in my search for things that I want to invest in. And I give you access to a whole database of, the 400 plus opportunities that I've come across thus far. And you can find that at the passiveinvestingstarterkit.com. So that's where you can kind of join my list, learn more about me, my story. My email sequence kind of teaches you all about that. And I'm primarily on LinkedIn. So you can find me there.
Great. Well, we'll definitely put those links in the show notes for the episode. And Pascal, really appreciate the value that you've brought us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And listening audience, thank you again for jumping into another episode of The Freedom Point. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.